to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracie Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. My name is Tracie Austin, and I'm the Chief Talent Officer here at Elevated Talent Consulting. And for those of you that have been following our show for a while, I just want to say thank you so much. And if you have not yet, click on the little plusy plus at the top of your podcast app so you can follow us and give us all the stars because we love all of them. Not like 3 or 4, but like all the stars, right? As every employee in our organization knows, we love the appreciation for a job well done, and we like it here too. So with that, today we have an amazing guest with us with Tracie Sponenberg, and Tracie is with the Granite Group. And oh my goodness, Tracie, I have been following you for a while with how you are like disrupting all of the HR things and really pushing the buttons to transform HR. So I'll let you take it from there for a minute.
Oh, well, thank you, Tracie. It was great. It's always great to talk with another Tracie and who's not spelled with a Y. So it's
exactly. Well, yeah, we're going to discriminate against Tracie with the Y's right now. No, I'm kidding.
Got an IE. It's always, how do you spell it, with a Y or with an EY? I'm like, no, IE. So anyway, it's great to be here, and I'm so thankful we finally connected, and I love the work that you're doing, and we both have a lot of areas that cross where we're passionate about. But I've been at the Granite Group for about 8 years. I'm the Chief People Officer there, and probably shortly after I started kind of dipping my toes into, like you call, more disruptive things. I started coordinating Disrupt HR for my in my state. I started exploring my own areas of where I needed to improve, which one of them, frankly, was kind of moving from transactional to transformational, and started pushing myself. And that led to lots and lots and lots of really cool opportunities. And now I do a lot of trying to kind of bring people into that who may be where I was back then. And there's a lot of people who are, for one reason or another, still in that transactional environment.
Yeah, and you do, like, one of your keynotes, one of your key talks is, what does paper first to people first look like? So what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks a little bit different depending on, one of the things I use a lot is like, it depends, right? And that's what we use a lot in HR. It depends. So it depends on where you are. I mean, for me, I grew up with HR as compliance and HR as basically where you went to do paperwork and where you went to get your benefits. And while some of that is still certainly really important in the world of HR, I didn't know any different for the longest time. And so that's kind of how I led. That's what I describe as people first, real compliance focused, chasing people around to sign forms. And people first is truly leading people first. I really was, for much of my career, again, this is how I was trained, firmly business first, and did whatever the business needed. And whether or not that was aligned with the people goals, right? And I guess over time saw that really wasn't in anyone's best interest, and changed myself and tried to change my companies.
And how'd that work for you?
I mean, so far so good, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's
you just left me hanging there, yeah, Tracie. I'm like, oh, we need more than that.
Yeah, it's so far so good. Yeah, I was lucky when I joined the Granite Group. I mean, I very much joined the Granite Group for personal change. Like, it was close to my home. I was on a plane all the time. I had this opportunity. My girls had just lost their mom. I have 2 stepdaughters, and I was always gone. And I had an opportunity to join a company like down the street from my house. And I ended up being a really great career move for me. And it was really the first truly people first organization that I had ever worked for. We didn't call it that then when we started. We didn't really know, but I saw the things that were there. And, that really helped me embrace that side of myself, and that helped me bring some things. Like I came in and immediately brought things like, literal paper to people transformation, like literal, moving from a big packet of paper and onboarding to, embracing technology. But beyond that, it's a mindset shift, and that's something that took me a little time. And my CEO was a huge help with that because he truly leads people first.
So, so many of our listeners to this podcast, our HR listeners, are at smaller organizations, and they're typically the ones that I lovingly call, they drew the HR short stick. Meaning,
Yeah.
like, HR was kind of like, hey, you'd be good at this, but there's no background to that. And so I want to go back to, and have you define what people first means to you and what it means inside your organization, because sometimes I think for those of us that have been in really teeny tiny small organizations that don't have formalized HR, it's not. So I'd love to define that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, let me say that you can lead people first, even in those organizations. And I've worked in some of those organizations. Yep. But you may not know that that's an option. And that's, part of why when I'm speaking, I'm not speaking to, people who are working at the enterprise level companies, maybe some of the smaller ones, but I'm not looking to speak to people who work for companies that have 10,000 people or more, right? It's the people who work in 100-person or less, 500 or less, even sometimes 1,000 or less, where maybe you grew up as like you said, you inherited HR, you drew the short stick, and you ended up with those responsibilities. So it's harder for you, if you're one of those folks, I think, to move toward people first, but it's not impossible. And I think, first of all, I always look at this paper first to people first as having two sides. And one of it is, or two roadblocks, I would say. One of the roadblocks would be the support of the CEO and leadership, because often HR isn't in the C-suite, doesn't have the ability to have influence at the level it needs to have influence. So that's one roadblock. And the other roadblock is the person in that role themselves. And so that was me. I deeply understand that. It's harder to influence a CEO, again, not impossible, but you have to influence yourself first. So there's a real mindset shift that's required to, are you looking at your job? Are you getting up and thinking like, I've got this mountain of paperwork I have to do? Or are you getting up and thinking, how can I best, create the systems and processes for my people? How can I design a really great people experience? And by the way, that people experience doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be something simple as, here's a new online form that makes it easier for your people. It can be as simple as listening to your people. It can be really super simple. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's that mindset of, I'm going to sit in my office, or I'm going to sit in my cube, or I'm going to sit wherever and just plug away all day, or I'm really going to think about our people and how their lives are impacted by the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really rambled there, but there's a lot that goes into it.
And it really is. And it's shifting from what do I have to do versus what do I want to do that's going to create an impact, right? Like, I mean, our like what we live by here at Elevated Talent is we believe every individual has a right and a choice to be fulfilled in their work. As leaders, we have an obligation to create the container for that so they can step into it if they want and still meet the business outcomes at the same time.
There you go. That's a much better way of putting it. Yes. Much better way of putting it.
So thank you, by the way. And what I'm so curious about is, so often, we come across HR leaders that have been voluntold that they're going to be in HR. And I think that there's this question that isn't always asked. And that is, do you want to be here? Meaning, are you choosing HR, or did HR just choose you and you're just staying? And I think for HR to truly step into who we need to be as people ops and as talent optimization, we have to choose HR versus HR choosing us. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. And I would say, and this is a bit harsh, but I know I'm not alone in this sentiment, and I know it's not tomorrow, but if HR chose you and you don't want to be there, get out. Not tomorrow, not the next day, but make a step to get out, because it's not helping you. You're not going to be happy, and it's definitely not helping your people. But if you chose HR, it's still difficult. It's still going to be difficult, but I think that's really necessary. You not only have to choose it to get into it, but you have to choose it every day to stay in it. Because it's over the past few years, I talk about this a lot. Every one of my friends working in the world of HR, I should say in HR leadership, left their jobs, whether it was to start their own business, to consult, or to go to another position. Every single one over the past few years. I know people that stayed, not many, not many. So there was such a turnover. And so I think that's those of us who chose HR, we have to keep asking ourselves, and we may have days where it's like, oh, I want to get out. But if you're having more of those days, you really have to question if you're in the right place. And if HR chose you, what do you really want to do? Do you really want to do this work? There's so many things in HR. So if there are aspects you like, one of the things I do with my team, I try to do pretty regularly is, have conversations on what they want to do with their career. And, I have people on the team that want to do aspects of HR, but would never want to do other aspects. And so I try to play to their strengths, play to their interests. But it's a wide area, a really wide area.
Yeah, absolutely. And that becomes so important. That very simple question, and it's not just at work, but what do you want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you want to do?
Yep. And you have to be able to answer that question, or at least suss down enough. And quite honestly, naming what you don't want to do is as important, if not more, on what you do want to do.
Really important. And I think hopefully whoever you work for is starting those conversations. But if not, it's really important to start them yourself. I mean, even I've had those conversations with my boss as my role has grown and changed over the years, right? And those are difficult. But it's important to have those conversations, and what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And maybe you don't get to do everything you want to do, and maybe you keep some of the things you don't want to do, but you should feel happy and fulfilled and engaged in the work that you do. And if you don't, that's really going to show through to your people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've been there. I've been disengaged, so I know what that feels like.
Yeah. And so have I. And I'm just going to throw this out for our listeners. This wasn't planned, but I have a career goal setting workshop that I'm going to throw in our show notes for today. That it's free. I'm going to throw it out there. So if anyone's like, oh my gosh, I don't know, we'll throw that out there so that you can access it. So thanks, Tracie.
Which is okay if people don't want to know, right? And I think
it's
you
great.
Doing a workshop like that is wonderful to help people figure that out. And maybe they don't know what they really want to do, but they know what they'll tolerate. And that's okay too.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if we want to throw PI in here, like predictive index, which most of our listeners are aware of, like make sure that you are in the right role based on what your behavioral strengths are, because otherwise you're going to hate life and your job's not really going to love you either, right? Because you're going to be turned into a pretzel.
It's really true. And I think it's funny, when I started at the Granite Group, and we've used PI for a long time, the profile for my role was very different than my profile. But at the time, we had individuals, picking the parts to develop the job target, but it matched what my CEO selected. So what he was looking for in a CPO was almost exactly what my profile was, which is really interesting. So but my profile isn't exact, but he and I are better aligned because he was looking for someone who brought what I had. So it's been an interesting journey.
So I'm curious, when we look at owning our own transformation as we step into kind of becoming that transformational HR leader, a part of that is really translating what staff need and what HR needs into the C-suite as part of that transformation. So I'm curious, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I think in our company, where everybody at the executive level spends a decent amount of time with our people. We have 60 plus locations. And in the best companies, that what people want and what the C-suite wants, when they aren't, it gets a little bit murkier, right? And so one of the things that we've really tried to work on is, and we're not quite there, but we're getting better, is, not quite radical transparency, but a lot of transparency. And sharing financial targets, sharing how people have an impact on the job, sharing um, everything, good news and bad. One of the things that our CEO did during COVID was every day for the first 3 months, put out a video, because our people consume information better on video than by email. So put out a video every single day on what was going on, and just keeping those lines of communication open. So I don't look at it so much as, well, HR is going out and listening to people and coming back and bringing it to the C-suite. In our organization, I think in a lot of organizations that do this right, there's listening happening all the time at all levels, and that is always incorporated into how the business works. That's a little bit idealistic, and it's not perfect. You talk to people and they're like, I'd like a lot more money, and that's not always going to translate, right? So those things aren't always aligned. But in the very best of companies, there's active listening happening all the time and action happening all the time. So it's challenging. So I look at this a lot. So there are a lot of HR folks who don't take the time to get out and listen to their people, whether that's virtually or whether that's in the office. And I certainly was one of those people early on in my career. We're too busy. I'm so sensitive to that. We've got so much to do every day, but there's nothing more important than getting that pulse on what people want. And that extends beyond HR. That extends to our, head of purchasing, our head of marketing, our CEO, or COO, or president. All of us spend a significant amount of time with our people. So instead of taking that and translating it, it's more like co-designing strategy.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So as we start to kind of wrap this up here, I'm so curious, what's a takeaway that you have for our small business owners or executives that are listening into our conversation today?
So I think, my company is maybe a little bit larger, but I've worked at a lot of smaller companies. And one of the things, again, I just mentioned talking to our people, and that's, I think, one of the things that we miss the most is that opportunity, even in small companies, to have your employees have a voice. So to really have them, if not a seat at the table, proverbial seat at the table, really have them involved in all that you do. If you're designing processes and systems for, say, drivers or for folks in the warehouse, if you don't have them involved in that process, then how do you know that that's going to work for them, right? And so I think the one thing I would leave is keep those lines of communication open, design things with people instead of for people, and that can happen at any size company at any level.
Amazing. And how about for our HR professionals listening in today that are going, okay, there's a lot of juicy nuggets there. Where do I start?
Yeah. And I think with anything, start with your community. So start with somebody that you know. If you're stuck and if you want to go from here to there, start with somebody that you know, or just reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and just have a conversation on. I do this all the time. I have people reaching out all the time, and I talk to people all the time. I reserve a block of time in my every week to just chat with people. And it's, if you build that community, if you lean into your community, and if you have a conversation with somebody in your community, at the very least, you might make a friend. And at the most, you might find some inspiration that will really help you in the next steps in your career, or will really help you feel good about where you are in your company, or will really help you help your people within your company. So that I can't overemphasize the importance of community.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's really important there, especially for so many of these individuals that listen to our podcast, they're an HR department of one, and isolation is a real thing, right?
It's for sure. I was a department of one for almost half my career. And I think a lot of people don't think of me that way, but I know exactly what that's like. And it's really hard. But transformation is totally possible, even with the department of one. It requires a lot of things that we don't have the time to get in now, but totally possible.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Tracie, thank you so much for being with us today. And for our listeners want to find you, follow you, find the Granite Group, we'll have all the links in the show notes for that. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, thank you for having me. I mean, this is great. And I love the shorter format. It's really fun. Folks listening in will not see that we had lots of technical glitches, but getting on here, which is ironic because I speak on technology all the time, but I'm currently on Zoom into my phone so Tracie can see me, and I'm looking at her on the computer. So it's probably a really strange visual. I'm in shorts and a t-shirt, so in flip-flops, but that's the way of the world today. But anyway, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And be sure to follow Tracie. And if you have an opportunity to see her speak, I would highly recommend it. So with that, thank you so much for joining us this week. Be sure to follow us and come back next week. And don't forget that we have a brand new format of our podcast coming up that'll start to air in November. So our format is changing, and it's going to something really fun where we will have an executive CEO on week 1 of the month. Week 2 will be an HR person, and week 3 will be a line level staff. So we can start to hear what is the impact of the transformational HR strategies that we are implementing inside of organizations. So with that, have a great week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.